What's up, everybody? It's the Welcome to the Show podcast, brought to you by Audible. Go to audibletrial.com/welcome to the show to get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial. That's audibletrial.com/welcome to the show. On the show today, we have Nick Francona. Nick is the son of Cleveland Indians manager Terry Francona. He was also employed by the Los Angeles Dodgers and the New York Mets. Nick brings a lot of knowledge in terms of the international signing practices of Major League Baseball teams. He's very insightful about Dominican leagues and baseball in general. This guy's one of the most interesting baseball people out there. And we really enjoyed talking to Nick. And this was one of our longer interviews. So we have decided that instead of releasing the whole thing here, what we're going to do is we're going to break the interview down into two parts. The first part of the interview delves into the life of Nick Francona, growing up the son of a big league manager and a big league player, going to the Marines and serving our country, being around when the Boston Red Sox broke an 86-year-old curse against the New York Yankees, and more. So that'll be the first part of the interview, which you're going to listen to now. So without further ado, here is Nick Francona. What are you up to these days? What's going on?
Still figuring out my next steps here. Got my hands in a couple different places. I'm considering law school. Should hear about that in the relatively near future. So hopefully that goes well. I'm doing some writing and some consulting and trying to figure out what I want to do long term here. Okay,
and do you think you'll go back into baseball at all, or is you leaving that behind at this point?
You know what? It's I don't have a great answer to that question. It's a hard one for me because I'd be lying if I said the desire isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think I was good at it, and I think people I worked with would say that as well. I think so. So there's a little bit of a bitter taste, kind of like leaving the industry the way that it happened, or it seems a little unfair, and it's a tough spot to be in when you feel like you can't do a job that you're excelling at for reasons that you're proud of. I think realistically, I am where I am outside of baseball. It's not an accident. There's really very real factors involved there. So I think until those change, it's probably a fool's errand to think that I'd be going back into baseball.
Mm-hmm.
But you never know. Those things can change. Rob Manfred isn't always going to be the commissioner. Some of his cronies aren't always going to be there. We'll see how some things shake out.
Yeah. So all right. So why don't we dial back a little bit? Let's rewind to the beginning. Nick, so where are you from? Where did you grow up?
I was actually born in Montreal.
Okay.
Did not live there long. My dad was playing for the Expos at the time, so was born up in Canada. Which funny aside, that required quite a bit of explanation that came to the bureaucrats with the Marine Corps and getting a top secret clearance. I had to insist that I was not going to be loyal to our friends north of the border, and was in fact my loyalty existed to the United States Marine Corps. It was pretty funny, but grew up in Tucson, Arizona. Both my parents went to U of A, so I spent most of my childhood there. When my dad became the manager of the Phillies, we moved to Philadelphia, and then after my freshman year in college, we moved to Boston when he was up there.
Okay.
And it's interesting. I didn't spend a ton of time in Boston, obviously growing up, and was at college most of the time, but sort of consider that home. My mom still lives there and have family there, and sort of an adopted hometown.
Yeah. So it sounds like you moved around a lot as a kid. And so are you technically not a U.S. citizen, or are you a citizen now?
No. I was born a citizen. I was born a U.S. citizen because both my parents were citizens.
Okay, I understand.
And I had to, I forget the exact technicalities of it. I think it was to get a top secret clearance, I had to renounce the Canadian citizenship.
Nick, so you moved around a lot. Do you root for any particular team, or do you like keep that a secret?
That's another question that I get a bunch, and I don't. It's not that I certainly like enjoy baseball and I'm a fan of it. I think it's hard to root for a particular team because you end up like changing your loyalties so often.
Yeah.
So you definitely grow attached to certain people. But those you're rooting for, like as a kid growing up, I'm rooting for my dad not to get fired.
Yeah.
And remain employed. So certainly rooting hard for a very specific team and a specific reason. And the same thing sort of happens when you're working in baseball. I guess I never really had a chance to root for like a specific team, like outside of like pure like fandom.
Yeah. Let me just say this now that I think your dad is. I never got to watch your dad play, but as a manager, I personally think your dad is the greatest manager of all time. I'm a Red Sox fan, so that's just
me. Aren't you? Wait, you gotta explain this to me. So I've listened to a few of the shows. You've got some interesting rooting loyalties that are probably a little conflicted there.
Oh yeah, but so first of all, thank you
with
for
your
A-Rod
fandom and Red Sox.
All I can do is be me, and being me is being a Red Sox fan, but also being an A-Rod fan, which he would have been a Red Sox member, but you know how that goes. So yeah, no, it's confusing. I'm not trying to justify anything. I know it's confusing, but what can I do? I don't know.
I'm just teasing you. I think that's actually a healthy thing, and I know we're kidding, but I think that's actually like at the root of what can make baseball grow and can what make it be good is when you have people that are fans of teams but can also be fans of players and follow them throughout the league. I think baseball needs more of that.
Yeah.
And I think that'll hopefully happen to some of these younger stars.
Yeah, I was definitely devastated when he signed with the Yankees in 2003. I'll never forget. I think they opened up in Japan that year. So I was definitely devastated as a kid still at the time, but yeah, I've grown to like players like Aaron Judge, these days and stuff. But these are special players. So
yeah, it seems like baseball's headed in that direction. Like as a Yankees fan, I find myself, when I realize that I'm doing it, I'll slap myself around and make sure that I know my loyalties. But I find myself admiring guys like JD Martinez and Chris Sale, Mookie Betts, and 10, 15 years ago, that would have been asinine. You know what I'm saying? So, but I think I agree with you. I think that that's good for baseball. And I think that what baseball needs to do now is kind of take advantage of that and let these players, I mean, maybe you can speak on that more since you did work for the Los Angeles Dodgers for a few and for the New York Mets. What is it about major leagues? From my end, it seems like they put this wall between the fans and the players, and we don't get to see, who these players truly are. Like in the NBA, you compare a guy like Blake Griffin to, I forget who I compared him to, and he has millions of more followers than, say, Mike Trout. To me, that doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? Like Blake Griffin's status in the NBA is not equal to Mike Trout's status in the MLB. He should be like the biggest character out there. You know what I mean?
For sure. And I think I think you can look at like individual examples and find like reasons for that happening in different cases. And I think like the Blake Griffin one is probably not exactly for his basketball prowess, at least at this point in time. But there's countless examples of that across other sports. And I think in general, it's a true statement to say that the athletes in other sports at least got a head start in being a lot more directly engaging. And you see a lot of NFL players that do the same thing. Yeah. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think on the player side, I think the culture throughout the game has always been a lot more conservative and don't basically, like, the safe route is don't say anything you can regret. Think about like one of the good examples that that stood out to me is remember last year when I think it was in response to Hader started the people discovered the tweets at the All-Star game, and then there was a trickle of them after that from different players, and I think it was John Lester that had made a comment about like, guys, go delete your tweets, and I think like what John's a good guy. I love John. And I think what he said is very representative of kind of the prevailing attitude throughout baseball. In that, and hell, for that matter, we like essentially teach the young prospects this with the classes that they get from the league and they're about the dangers of social media. It's basically like what can go wrong in this risk-averse approach to it, as opposed to engaging. And like when you say like delete the tweets, it's like you're not talking about. It's like the problem is that somebody saw them, not that like you said in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I think there's like so I think you have that general issue with like the culture being pretty conservative. I don't begrudge like anyone if not everyone is going to be like the social media guy and want to be out there. Like that's totally fine. Like my dad, for example, is like, I think with like, I just heard an interview with him a couple days ago where he was talking about how he never goes on social media, never checks it. And that's like, with somebody like that, I think it's a generational thing where he is actually like pretty engaging. And I think would, if he were of a younger generation and grew up with it, would be pretty comfortable with that. But if it's not everybody's cup of tea, and some people aren't into that, and then I think part of the thing that the NBA does really well is they allow the players' personalities to come through, and they're not all going to be the same, and that's perfectly fine, and we should embrace that.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's kind of where I'm going with this. Like Bryce Harper shows a little too much passion, and we're all criticizing him one day. But by the same token, you have these ads running, let the kids play. And then you have Tim Anderson hit a walk-off. He hit a home run and bat flips, and he's getting tossed at with the second, on the other side. It's just like a mixed message. And I almost wish that, I know that it's going to take time for baseball to evolve and kind of catch up with the times and maybe let go of some of these old-fashioned rules. But I think that if they want the sport to survive, which it will survive, but I mean, if they want it to maintain its popularity, which it's losing popularity rapidly, they have to do this. They have to evolve much quicker than this.
For sure. And I think if you look at a lot of the engagement from baseball players early on, and it's evolved from this now, but early on, it was sort of social media was viewed within the game as a marketing tool, which I think is putting the cart before the horse a little bit. And if you look at the real influential people in other sports, like obviously like your on-field talent is highly correlated to your following, but there's certainly an authenticity factor there of people that are going to actually be engaging. Like nobody just wants to see you like be pimping out like your sponsors like in every single post and just doing like the nonsense. It's not fun for anybody. That's not like an authentic engagement that a lot of these platforms enable. And I think there are certain players that there's guys that are really good at that, and I think the fans appreciate that. And I think there's like as a result of that, I think those guys will end up getting more opportunities, and it'll certainly benefit them in the long run. And I think baseball just needs to embrace that a little more. I don't think I watched a Portland Trailblazers game all year until the playoffs.
Right.
Every now and then I'll scroll through the last couple of days and see a Damian Lillard tweet. He's awesome on there. He's outstanding. I'm more of a fan of him and that team as a result of like that engagement. And I don't think I've ever watched a Trailblazers game for the last couple of weeks.
Right.
Yeah. Same here.
And on the baseball side, you have a guy like Noah Syndergaard who uses social media perfectly. And you can't force.
He's awesome on there.
He's amazing, and you can't force it. That's the thing. He doesn't force it, but I sometimes I feel like there's I don't know if you listen to this podcast. Speaking of Alex Rodriguez, and I mentioned this like 1,000 times on this podcast, but the A-Rod podcast with Big Cat, they had Gary Vee on as a guest. Did you listen to that by any chance? So I thought that
I didn't listen to it, but I'm familiar with Gary Vee.
Yeah, so some of what they discussed on that podcast is exactly what I'm referring to. It's that you know, you have a guy like Brent Porcio of Top Velocity using player content to help his clientele and his students, or whatever you want to call them, learn how to improve their pitching ability. But then he gets sued by Major League Baseball and also by a player in Trevor Bauer for using their likeness or whatever you want to call it. And it's just like, why? You know, he's teaching these kids to emulate you. You know what I mean? He's teaching them what you're doing, and it's just like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like on my end too, when I'm using an image, for example, on one of my posts, I'm looking for things that are public domain or whatever because I'm afraid that I'm going to get sued, and there's no way I can take on Major League Baseball because you hear these horror stories. But why do people like me, for example, why do we have to be afraid of stuff like that? We're helping the game. We're pumping it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I have not heard that specific podcast, but I'm definitely going to go check that out. Mm-hmm. I had actually had the chance to it was a crazy coincidence. I just read some comments about that Gary Vee had made about baseball's marketing issues last summer, mm-hmm. and it happened to be sitting next to him on a plane back to New York. We were both at the there was I think it was a sports collectibles convention in Cleveland, and he's a big sports nut, and I was volunteering with a group that was raising money for veterans out there. And we started talking about this topic, and it was in the examples that you talked about specifically were mentioned, and he brought up the idea that there's this desire to almost like choke out people from, and he used the word suffocate, and say like suffocate the environment and make it hard for people to consume their content. And that's I think there's, like you cited a couple examples. I think there's a lot bigger. There's other symptoms of that same disease where if you mm-hmm. look at like how, like one of the biggest complaints you hear from fans is how difficult it is to just watch baseball games. And mm-hmm. I can think of almost nothing more harmful for the future of the game than actively preventing fans from watching games. I mean, that is baseball is almost like a religion, and that it's like fandom is usually passed from generation to generation, and that's a huge asset for the sport as a business. Mm-hmm. But if you're preventing people from consuming that, and I think it takes to have that mindset requires this really short-sighted mentality of trying to monetize every single interaction, and not almost taking it as an article of faith that if our sport is popular and people love baseball, there are innumerable ways that we can generate revenues from that. Mm-hmm. And I think when you focus on revenue as the starting point, it becomes I fear that right now they're cutting off generations of fans. People are worried about the attendance and stuff like that now. I think the real blowback from this is going to be 10, 15 years from now. Right now, baseball's so healthy financially mm-hmm. for all of the wrong reasons. And I think that's going to actually get worse once the gambling revenues come in. For like, you're going to see they're going to be making money hand over fist, and people aren't going to be enjoying the sport the same, and that's going to have pretty severe consequences down the road.
Yeah, Nick, I wanted to get your take on, for someone that's worked at the major league level and you know, not in more than one organization. What's your take on the analytics and baseball and the way that we as fans, we look at all these managers around the league and we don't really know where to draw the line between if this manager's doing things by his gut or by a piece of paper with numbers on it?
Where to go on that topic? That's a big one. I think in general, I hate the debate about kind of analytics versus scouting or analytics versus the gut. I think it creates a false premise to start, and I think I think it makes things competing interests that don't inherently have to be. And I also think that there's a major gap between the public narratives and what's actually happening, in the sense that there's going to be some folks that talk often about analytics and speak that language and can't implement them for shit, and vice versa as well. Mm-hmm. Not every team's going to talk about it as much. A lot of, like, honestly, the public debate is informed by like the PR and marketing elements as much as anything. And that's unfortunate. The other thing that I think is an issue is I think there's I saw a pretty bad trend that concerned me with And to be clear, I am massively in favor of using analytics to the highest degree possible. And I think like I would be extreme in that regard, but I would define that as using any information at your disposal. And I think part of doing that effectively is understanding the relevancy, the value, and the applicability of that information in different contexts. And I think one of the trends that scares me a little bit is I think you see this tendency of people to dive in really hard on they might say, okay, we can measure this part of the game with 100% objectivity and accuracy, and it might be 5% of the puzzle, and the rest of it we're taking a swag at, but that might matter for 95% of it, and so we're just going to ignore that altogether, and you end up missing the forest for the trees a lot. And I think I think that creates a little bit of hubris with as much as you see it's easy to dismiss a lot of ignorance on some of the old school folks, and I think some of that is very real. I think there is a lot of like hesitancy to change for not so good reasons, but I think there's also a lot of hubris on the side of some of the analytics folks where it's really unwarranted. And I think if you went back 15, 20 years and were trying to tell somebody that the way a catcher receives the ball is really important and we should be evaluating them that way, you would have probably been accused of being like an old school blowhard. And now there's a point where that was like the trendiest of all analytics stuff.
Right. And we've kind of beat around the bush on this issue, but yes, so Nick Francona is the son of Terry Francona. The reason why I'm bringing this up now at this point in the interview is because your father to me seems like one of these people where he's not married to analytics, but he's not married to the old school way of thinking. It seems to me like he's open to new things, and the way he used to use Andrew Miller and his bullpen. Many people viewed that as groundbreaking in a way. You know what I mean? Is that fair to say, or do you think, or is somebody just barking orders at someone like your father? Like this is when you use Andrew Miller or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and this topic we discussed this topic actually a lot when we were having discussions about managerial hires with the Mets and afterwards. And to use my dad as an example, is I think he's been fortunate in that the two front offices he's worked with in Boston and Cleveland are both filled with a lot of bright, intelligent people that are team players and are very forward looking and bring a lot of different skills to the table to try to help the team win.
Yeah.
And I think there's a little bit of a paradox that a lot of people might not like understand that on the surface, and that I would agree that I think my dad is particularly good at using information to try to put his players in the best position to win. He's also like, I don't think he ever completed a math class. I mean, he doesn't, none of this stuff is necessarily like a result of him sitting there like poring over computer printouts and writing out algorithms. It sounds unsexy, but it's really comes down to like the organizational dynamics and having smart people that you trust are pulling on the same end of the rope. And I think from the other side of it, I think it's actually, there's a little bit of danger in that if the manager is just going to be a puppet of a front office or the analytics advocate. I think these things tend to be implemented better and implemented like authentic with some like authenticity. And one of my colleagues had a great way of describing it with the Dodgers. Josh Burns talked about it being the difference between compliance and buy-in. And if the manager if you're a player and the manager can't really explain something to you because he doesn't understand it, or even worse, doesn't believe it and is just saying it for his own job security, well, that's not going to end very well. It just isn't. And so for these things to actually work, I think it's good to have that kind of like built-in sanity check that works with my dad, where you might have like a guy like Theo Epstein or Chris Antonetti are far more educated than he is in a traditional like academic sense, and more schooled with numbers, and there's that safety net in there. They have to explain it to my dad, and if they can convince my dad of it, and he can take ownership of it, it sure as hell gonna be easier for him to get the players to buy in.
That makes sense. And so sticking with this topic in a way, not with this topic, but since we're discussing your father at this point, let's go back again and talk a little bit about your upbringing, because it's I don't think we've ever had the son of a big league manager, minor league manager, or someone that was involved in baseball. You were involved in baseball too, but how was it like growing up knowing that your father was a big league player?
You know what? I was as a kid, like I was really young when he was a big league player.
Okay.
So I didn't. I can remember a little bit of it, but I wasn't old enough to really go to the clubhouse when he was playing in the big leagues or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when so a lot of my memories from that are from his time as a minor league manager.
Okay.
Which was really cool, like awesome as a young kid. You're the minor leagues are a lot more relaxed and not as much kind of uptightness that goes along with the big leagues. Big league level, there's less people there, and there's a lot more free flowing of an environment. Mm. And I used to love. I would go on the long bus trips, and everyone would be miserable on a 10, 12-hour bus ride, and I was having the time of my life. That was a really cool experience, and we lived in Tucson, and each summer we'd go to wherever he was managing, whether it was he was in the White Sox system for most of that, so it was Birmingham, Alabama, South Bend, Indiana. It was a really cool time growing up as a kid, and he didn't become a major league. He became a major league manager when I was in I think I was in 6th grade. It was when we moved to Philly. That was his first big league job.
I see. And then since you mentioned the Chicago thing, you posted a picture, I think it was a couple weeks ago, of you, your dad, and Michael Jordan in the dugout. What was that like?
It was, I think you normally have this, there's a level around professional athletes where even minor leaguers for young kids where there's people get a little bit of like starstruck by professional athletes, and with Michael Jordan, that's on it. He's the most famous athlete on the planet at that point, and it's it was an entirely different level. It was pretty cool, and I think the way he handled it was, even as a young kid, you could tell. Like I was young, but I'd been around enough at that point where you could tell that everyone knew he was different. I mean, these are guys that are making like no money. And he's extraordinarily wealthy, extraordinarily famous, and he put the team first and managed it to the degree that it was possible to not make everything about him and to respect the work that the younger players put in and not detract from that. And he worked his ass off, and it kind of bothers me when I see people like comment somewhat derogatorily about his baseball career. Like, I think it's pretty damn impressive to not play baseball for as long as he did, and to AA level is extremely high level of baseball. Yeah. And to just go out and do that and even be remotely competitive is really impressive.
It's funny that you mention his personality and stuff. I have my wife's best friend and her husband were at a wedding, and they sent us a picture, and they're sitting next to Michael Jordan in a lobby of a hotel. And I'm just like, what the fuck? And they're like, yeah, man, he was here. We sat down with him. We talked to him for like 15, 20 minutes. He was nice. He, humored them, like, and that's not what you hear about a guy like Jordan. You always hear that he's kind of a nightmare, that he's, super competitive and this and that, but that's not what I heard. Punching Steve Kerr in the face, or whatever.
I mean, is undoubtedly like, it's crazy when you almost take it for granted being around professional sports, like the level of competitiveness of these are all the guys that were the best at every level, and you don't get like that without being competitive to start with. So to stand out in such an extreme way for your competitiveness is really saying something. Mm-hmm. And I think with him, like, it's all valid, and I think it's actually like a very admirable trait. Yeah. I don't like the guy I don't think he lied, cheated, or stilled to get like that. He just wanted to be the best, and that's pretty refreshing.
Okay, so let's move on from the Chicago White Sox and Michael Jordan a little bit and fast forward. Your dad's time with the Phillies, I think he spent 4 years as manager there. Wasn't all that successful, but he ends up with the Boston Red Sox, and the Red Sox break an 86-year-old curse, the curse of the Bambino. What was it like in Boston? I feel like vomiting just talking about it. But how was it?
How was it? Clap? Can we all just clap right now?
No. Well, you two can, but I'm not going to.
Well, so I was a freshman in college at that point, and I didn't really know what you were getting into in Boston. I was in Philly for school, but I'd been up there. It was crazy. Just the previous fall when I was going on, probably late that fall. I was in 2003. I was going on recruiting trips and was at a playoff game at Fenway on the other side of it when I was on a recruiting trip up there, and my dad was with the A's at the time, and we saw them. They blew that playoff series to the Red Sox. They're up 2-0, and then ended up losing. And you kind of get a taste of like the aura of like playoff games at Fenway and the old Yankee Stadium are like nothing else.
Oh my
God!
God!
The old Yankee Stadium was eerie when you get like the big games there was like a vibe that like nothing was safe. Like
I love that stadium.
Mm-hmm.
You're right.
It did feel like there were ghosts there. People talk about that. It felt like the ghost of Babe Ruth was there pulling for somebody to boot a ball.
You're so right, man. It's the house that Ruth built. So exactly it was.
And so that fall, my dad's first year there, I was it was my first semester in college, and my dad had actually not. I think he went to the playoffs as a player, like one of his first years, and then with the A's, but hadn't been a ton. So they let me. My parents said, you never know. So when you're gonna get to experience this, so they were pretty liberal with letting me take some time off of school, and you can catch a couple games here and there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to go to a couple of those series, and then ended up missing a little bit too much time once it went deep. I think in one case I had like an econ midterm, and then the next time I went to class, like they were talking about the next one being the next week after that, and I realized at that time I'd probably better attend a few more classes. But the Red Sox fans, like that was an introduction to like, that was something else. That was like right when Facebook was coming out, and Penn was one of the first schools that had it, and like I was getting like some weird shit on there from random people. Like it was a little much at times.
Nick, what's it like being in a major league locker room, and without giving away any classified information that we're not supposed to know about, but like are certain organizations different? Like, are certain ones better, and do they treat players better? Like, what's it like being in a locker room? Because that's like, I feel like that's a dream of mine to like experience it. But what is it like to be in the middle of all that?
I think it's changed a lot over the years, in that, and I think there's a couple factors there. I think for one, each team's going to have its own personality, and that's a good thing. I think so that you're going to see some differences there. I think that change that probably has, like, within the confines of the locker room itself, probably has more to do with the players themselves than the organization. I think one of the things that has changed a lot is even just like the physical layout and architecture of a locker room can have like a big influence on like the way guys interact and the dynamic in there. And in the old days, you would see what you kind of see in like minor league clubhouses now, where it's a small room and kind of small rectangle or square, and everyone's kind of in pretty close proximity, and there's not a lot of place to go and hide, and you sort of by default are kind of in every right there with your teammates. In the newer big league locker rooms, kind of everybody's spread to the wind a bit. There's a lot more space, a lot more like lounge rooms, food rooms, etc. And so guys will inevitably like obviously like still see each other and hang out, but it's a lot more comfortable, which is a good thing. And I think there's I don't think that necessitates this idea that we're not gonna interact with our teammates or it's gonna drive a wedge between anybody. I think there's other factors that contribute to that when you do see that, but there's you just don't see the close physical proximity in a forced way that you used to.
We had spoken previously about, and I guess we're going to dial it back a little bit here because we are two Dominican guys hosting this podcast, and we did speak about you living in DR for a year while your father was managing Las Águilas, and we happen to be two aguiluchos over here. We're big Águilas fans. What was it like living in a foreign country? And of all countries, the Dominican Republic, where baseball is religion. What was it like living there while your father was managing that team?
So we were there for it was probably, I guess it would be like three or 4 months. It was an awesome experience. So like I loved it from start to finish. It was kind of funny looking back on it. You don't realize like how. I mean, you're in the moment and you realize like how crazy like Dominicans are about baseball, and that was not like back then. Like I know the league has changed a lot down there, but like it's still completely insane. Mm-hmm. I mean, like you lose like 3 games in a row to Licey or Escogido, like you were packing your shit because you might not be the manager anymore. I mean, that's how like how crazy it is. Yeah. And they, it was funny that like our whole family is down there, but you never really know if you're going to stay the whole season or not, because that's just like managers down there, they go through them like it's cool. But it was an awesome experience. I like Santiago is an unbelievable place. Mm-hmm. I ended up, we would do, I was ostensibly being homeschooled, but would mostly just go to the ballpark every day and spend time there and hopefully try to make up for it when I got home. With my mom did the best she could to keep a rein on us, but she was really good about like recognizing that this was like a once in a lifetime experience and trying to get the most out of it. So we saw a lot of the stuff that there was to see in the country and like interacted with people and tried to like really appreciate the life experience that it was. And I'm really grateful for that because I fell in love with the country and the people. And I think that influenced a lot of the positions that I took later on. And like, I felt like very like protective of like the young, like Dominican kids and that like we're trying to make it in baseball. I felt like we had like baseball as a whole and myself being part of that, like wanted to see baseball be a force for good in that country. So you have people that love it so much and give so much to the game and they're a major part of it.
And so what was it like when Las Águilas won the championship? That was the winter league. What was it like when they won the championship?
So I think our family had gone home by that point, and my dad stayed in the DR so we could at least catch some of the school year. But it was pretty funny. And when I was working with the Mets, our Latin American director is a guy named Rafael Landesoy, who's really the guy is awesome. He's like very grandfatherly figure and terrifying at the same time. Like a guy that you really don't like, but in a good way, and that like you don't want to let him down, and like the players like love him and fear him. Like awesome guy and like kind of a legend in Dominican baseball circles. And Rafi was managing a playoff game against my dad and had Pedro on the hill for him, and they ended up beating Pedro that year in the playoffs. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Especially like hearing it from Landis, which was interesting.
Was this prior to Pedro being called up to the bigs to play for Montreal?
You know what? I don't know. I think I'm guessing he was probably already in the big leagues.
Okay.
Because I think that might have been the last time he pitched that deep into winter ball too.
Okay, because I mean, guys used to go and play. To me, it seemed like regularly. Like when I was a kid, I felt like you would see Tony Pena play in for Las Águilas, and there was a point where Manny Ramirez played and stuff like that. And I feel like you don't see that as often anymore.
Yeah, when my dad was there, they had it was Tony Pena was there.
Yeah.
The other, I think it was Alberto Castillo, maybe was the other catcher who then who worked with I worked with him with the Mets. He was down at the academy down there as a catching instructor. Miggy he didn't play much. He was on the roster, but he was really young, and so he was ostensibly 18, which probably meant he was like 23. I forget how many years he later added, but that was but he was like a young kid. Felix Fermin, Louis Alicea. There were some big time players that played, and you saw that throughout the league. And now it's changed. I think guys are more. I think a lot of it has to do with the organizations themselves. There's a lot of hesitancy to have guys that you're paying that much money to go play ball down there.
Yeah, you see younger guys or guys that maybe, they've made it to the bigs, but they're not as, like Astudillo played for, I think is he Puerto Rican or Venezuela? I don't remember. But you'll never see a superstar Dominican player like Luis Severino, let's say, go down and play for the winter leagues anymore. That's just not going to happen anymore.
No, especially not the pitchers, and increasingly less so the position players. Like there's some exceptions. Sometimes the guy gets hurt and you want him to get an extra couple ABs.
Yeah.
But you just don't see it, and it's I think it's a shame because I do think there's a lot of benefit. I understand why it happens, but I think guys get a lot out of playing there, and I think the Americans get a ton out of it as well. I mean, those are like there's no AAA stadium that compares to fans getting up in your grill like being an opposing player in Santiago.
I agree.
Yeah,
and we've talked about that before.
I think that's healthy.
Yeah, we've talked about that before, and I kind of wish that American baseball would adopt that kind of passion for the game instead of sitting back with a beer and popcorn and a hot dog and this and that. Those fans are involved. I mean, they're dancing, they're singing, they're making noise, they're all that stuff. I mean, I don't know if my dad went down. I didn't have a chance to go down for this, but my dad went down to Miami to watch DR in the WBC, and he says that he's never heard a stadium.
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
Yeah, he said he's never heard a stadium like that before. Like he said, the stadium was shaking. It was insane, and I think that's good. That's good for baseball. We should try to adopt some of those things up here.
Yeah, that stadium has never been like that before. Nobody goes to Miami games.
No.
Well, I think that's like a crazy juxtaposition of it is for that to happen. And I mean, just look at the contrast between that stadium, the way it was rocking then, and the way it is now. Even for, I mean, not that they've had too many meaningful games in that stadium, but like it's certainly not going to resemble the same dynamic, even if they're selling tickets better.
Yeah,
and I think we should certainly embrace that. And I don't think you can force that. And I think it's gonna take on different dynamics in different places. But I think if you kind of let it happen authentically, that's something to celebrate. And I think it really just embrace the shit out of that and let it take on a life of its own.
Yeah, so in editing for Call to the Pen, we have a writer. I'm not sure if he's of Korean descent, but he wrote a piece on the KBL and the Korean Baseball League, and how at one point it was completely it seemed like the sport was just going to die out in Korea baseball, and they decided to bring back. They brought in cheerleaders and men who would rile up the crowd and stuff and start chants, and the KBL is bigger than it's ever been before. It's like the biggest sport in Korea right now. And I know that baseball fans are a little, I mean, I'm a baseball fan, but some of them are very snobby and stuck in their old ways. If they see a cheerleader or something standing on top of the dugout trying to start start up a chant or whatever, some people are going to roll their eyes. But maybe the next generation will embrace something like that, and you can get, the crowd actually involved in the game. You know what I mean? I think that's what we need. It almost seems like going to a baseball game is like going to see a movie. You know what I mean? Like you just sit there and watch, and I think more involvement needs to be had.
Yeah.
And I think that's just like what you're talking about is like one manifestation of a bigger issue, and like the people there are. I think there's like some of that is going to be like cultural differences in different places of the way people are like watch sports and engage with how they cheer and boo, and that's going to be different in different places, and that's awesome. And like that's not going to be the same in every American city either, and that's great. Like those differences are what makes each place unique. But I think the other difference that I would want to dig into more, and that I think is important, is there. I genuinely believe that there is a real difference in the passion for the sport,
mm-hmm.
and that's something that is that I think matters. And I think you want. It's not that like plenty of there's different ways to express that outside of physically the way people cheer at a game. And I think that's the kind of, it might be like, as you mentioned earlier, like somebody might be passionate enough about baseball that they want to take clips and cut them up and analyze pitching mechanics or
mm-hmm.
a guy's swing or share highlights in a certain way. Like, awesome. That's like, fuel that fire. Don't extinguish it.
His name is, I want to give him credit. His name is Eon Lee. You can find his writing on Call to the Pen. The piece is called Embracing How KBO, not KBL, my bad. Embracing How KBO became popular. Embracing How KBO became popular and could fix baseball. Okay, so let's move on and talk a little bit about your time in the Marines. I know that you got drafted? Well, according to some things that I've, in my research, it looks like you were drafted by the Boston Red Sox. It doesn't look like you played in any minor league games though. Why didn't that pan out? That's question number one. And question number two, how did you end up in the Marines?
So getting drafted was out of high school, and I was half decent as a high school player. I was certainly not good enough to be skipping college, and I had a pretty good opportunity at Penn, and that was I was smart enough to be realistic about it and understand that there was probably wasn't going to get drafted if my dad wasn't the manager there, and I was actually, it was pretty funny. I was at lunch with a couple friends when it happened, and I got a call from Theo Epstein, who my friends thought it was like the coolest thing ever that Theo was calling. And at that time, I think he was like 29 years old or something like that. And so Theo was a lot closer. He was probably closer to me in age than my dad. And Theo was pretty funny about it on the phone. He said, "I'm calling to let you know we drafted you, and they'll send a contract out, but you better not sign it. Like we're not actually signing you." It was pretty funny.
And then so then how did you end up in the Marines? Did you finish college and then enlist, or was there an interruption somewhere in between?
No, I had. It was after I graduated from Penn, and my freshman year at Penn, I was really bothered by the fact that one of my buddies I played travel baseball with, and it's kind of funny looking back, like how these things affect you, because like it wasn't like we were like all that close of friends.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Marine. He had enlisted in the Marines after high school, and I think was in Iraq at the time. And it really bothered me. Like it would keep me up at night sometimes. And I, like, to the point of I would it upset me that like I was at school and my biggest concern, like I'm sitting there having like going to baseball practice, like periodically going to classes, playing quite a bit of online poker, and this dude's fighting a war. Like I felt like I like it wasn't fair and like I wasn't doing my part. And I went to talk to a recruiter and I didn't know shit about the military. Like I had no idea what was going on, and probably could not have even named like all the branches of it or anything, and didn't know like that there were officers and enlisted, and the recruiters were certainly not going to fill you in on that. They were very much in the business of getting you to put pen to paper at that point. And so it took they have like a standardized test called the ASVAB, which is it's basically like the SAT for the military.
Right.
And so it took that, and my friends, I had my intention was just I knew my parents would be pissed, so I was just gonna sign up and tell them after the fact. And my friends had a bit of an intervention, and I think one of them actually told my mom. So then the plan was they talked me down and convinced me to at least finish school, and if I still had that urge and desire to do it, to do it afterwards, and that it was still there. I did an internship in DC at a think tank after my junior year, and worked with a guy who had gone to Penn and was an Army Ranger, and he that was my first real like up close exposure to a guy that had served, and got to talk to him about that a lot. His name's Andrew Exum, and Andrew was really influential in that decision, and we when we talked about it, he said if like the things that are appealing to you about it, like if you want to be in the thick of it, like actually like leading people on the ground, like the Marine Corps is probably the best route to go for that. And so that's what I ended up doing.
Wow. Did your friend decide to enlist after 9/11? I'm assuming it seems like it was around that time.
It was a couple years after, like okay. not long, but I was a sophomore after that when that happened, and it definitely stuck with me. And I think most of the guys, like even so, like the guys that I served with, like around my age, they had a few years at least for the most part between the decision to sign up and 9/11, and I think I think some of that is like you can't control what age you're at. Then like you hear the stories, like there's certain guys like went in the next day, and I think other ones that like for me it stuck with me, and it like I can't say that it was like the only reason, but I'm pretty confident that if that didn't happen, it wouldn't even have been on the radar.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine what that must have been like. And I've told you this before, but I'll say it again. Thank you for your service. And I have some friends that have enlisted and served. A cousin of mine served. And you guys, man, I don't even know. I mean, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you guys. So yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Yep.
So okay, so all right, so now you enlist in the Marines. How many years did you serve there?
So I went to OCS, which is Officer Candidate School after college, which is it's like some people say it's like the officers' version of boot camp. I think that's there's not quite the truth. There's some of that there, but it's kind of like the screening element. It's like you're trying out to be an officer, and if you pass and complete it, you commission and you're second lieutenant at that point, and if not, you go home, kind of no harm, no foul. And so I did that, then went to the Marine Corps has a program which is it is by no means fun, but it is very beneficial in that it's a 6-month program called or a little less than that, called the Basic School, where every officer, no matter what job you're going to do, you go through the same 6 months. So it kind of gives everyone a foundational level of being on the same page, and kind of the entire ethos of the Marine Corps is built around optimizing for the young enlisted riflemen. and that gives it a everybody has that orientation coming out of there, which is awesome. And so at that point, you basically compete for the specific jobs that you want to do, and kind of everyone has this idea that like you see the Marine Corps commercials and that everyone's kind of on the front, like duking it out. And especially with officers, that is by no means the case. And the vast majority of jobs are actually not in combat arms. And so I did pretty well there and got lucky. My mom was hilarious about it. She was pissed trying to talk me into being like an accountant or like administrative type job. She's like, "Oh, you majored in business in school. You'd be a great like financial type officer." And I'm like, "Mom, nobody watches these commercials and wants to do their paperwork. That's just like not how it goes." And I got pretty lucky in that I got to do. I wanted to be a scout sniper platoon commander, and so I ended up going to infantry officer course and an intelligence course and a sniper employment course, and it was pretty cool. I was really fortunate with how it worked out.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Don't forget, Nick Francona Part 2 will come out next Thursday. So look out for that. In Part 2 of that interview, we're going to discuss his time with the Los Angeles Dodgers and the New York Mets, some shady international signing practices that he was privy to, and more. So thanks again for listening. Thanks, Nick Francona, for coming on the show. Peace.